Today, we're going to dive into the story of a man who was born in a cage, but ended up building a bridge to the stars. A hero who was taught to build walls, but instead chose to become a beacon. This is the incredible parable of Sodom Yat, the Green Lantern who literally became a sun.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Our story kicks off on the planet Daxam. I want you to just imagine a world so terrified of the unknown that the endless universe feels like a suffocating blanket. In this quiet, gray world where stars are seen as bad omens, a dreamer was born, taught that the sky above was nothing more than a ceiling.
You see, on Daxam, your worth was all about how high your barricades were and just how suspicious you could be. But while everyone else was looking inward, building walls against the universe, Sodom Yat, he looked up. He wasn't just building with stone and mortar. He was the architect of his own escape.
And this slide, wow, it just nails the central conflict, doesn't it? For his entire civilization, the sky was a prison lid. But for Sodom, it was an invitation. In a culture that was basically suffocating from its own fear of the other, his simple, profound curiosity was a huge act of rebellion. So Dam's first big rebellion, it wasn't against a king or some army. No, it was against this invisible prison of mental geography. All those inherited fears and dogmas that chained his people to the ground. And honestly, that's the first and maybe the hardest journey any hero has to take.
Every true journey needs a catalyst, right? A spark. For Sodom, it came crashing down as a falling star, carrying an alien stranger named Tesog to the forbidden soil of Daxam. This one event wasn't just some random meteor shower. It was the spark that was about to ignite a revolution in Sodom's soul. Where his people saw a monster, Sodom saw a kindred spirit. He saw a reflection of his own loneliness. So he started repairing Tesog's ship in secret. And by doing that, he began dismantling the walls of his culture's deep-seated xenophobia, one screw at a time.
But this fragile hope he found was just brutally extinguished. His own father, in some twisted act of love that was really about control, murdered Tesog. And then came the brainwashing, a cruel process that ripped the warmth right out of his memories and replaced it with these chilling, awful nightmares. He became a hollow shell until a school trip to a museum delivered the final, devastating blow: Tesog's body, stuffed and mounted like some grotesque trophy.
The second he saw the truth, all that propaganda just shattered. And that agony, it didn't break him. It forged him. It hardened his resolve to not just escape, but to build his own salvation, far away from all the lies. And then, from those very heavens he'd always admired, came a sign, a green lantern ring. Now, it didn't choose a celebrated warrior or a king. No, it chose a mechanic, a boy working in the dirt who had already won the most important battle of all, the one against the cage of his own culture. This is such a critical turning point. The ring wasn't the source of his power, it was the amplifier. It found him because he had already proven he would risk absolutely everything for the truth. It took his quiet personal rebellion and just broadcast it across the universe, turning it into a public duty. With the ring, Sodom's power just skyrocketed. The Guardians of the Universe themselves saw his strength and chose him to become the new host for Ion, the living embodiment of willpower. But as you know, with godlike power comes a godlike test. And that test came in a savage battle with Superboy Prime. His enemy, in a horribly cruel twist of fate, exploited the one major Daxamite weakness, a deadly allergy to lead. Sodom won the fight, but at a terrible cost. The lead poisoning was permanent, incurable. It forced him to rely on his ring not just for power, but for every single breath he took. And so, the great irony of his life was set in stone. The visionary who could soar through the cosmos was now forever tethered to the heavy burden of his own origins. He learned a harsh but vital lesson. Immense power without a moral compass, that's just a fancier, bigger cage. And now we get to the climax of his entire journey. Sodom returns to Daxam, but not for revenge, not for glory. He goes back to save the very people who had once tried to break him, the people who had stolen his childhood and his only friend. So to save his people from the invading Sinestro Corps, Sodom makes the ultimate sacrifice. He plunges himself into the heart of Daxam's red sun, a star that should have killed him. Instead, he uses his incredible power to transform it,
to turn it yellow. And by doing that, he gifts his entire race with superpowers. He gives them the ability to save themselves. But the cost of this gift is his own freedom. He becomes a living sun god, a prisoner of the very light he created.
Just look at this. It's the perfect inverse of his origin story. A boy from a race that cowered in the shadows, a race that feared the sun and hated strangers, becomes the sun itself, a beacon of hope for everyone. His destiny was to become everything his homeworld was terrified of. Sodam Yat's journey teaches us a really profound truth. Our beginnings might be written for us, but we're the ones holding the pen for the final chapters. A single heart, when it's fueled by truth, can tear down walls that seem to reach the sky. And that leaves us with a question we all have to answer, right? In a world that's constantly trying to put us in a box, to define us, to tell us who to be and what to fear, how do we find our true purpose? How do we become the architects of our own liberation? The parable of Sodam Yat gives us a beautiful and powerful answer. True purpose isn't something you find, it's something you forge. You become the warmth for those who are shivering in the cold. You become the architect of a world without walls. You become the light for those who are still lost in the dark.